Hi guys, Ron here and welcome to the workshop. Today I want to talk about cranks and some new additions that I've been using for the past few months on my own bike, and then decided to start importing them and offering them to my customers and also on the web shop. So bit of a history or background check and the reason why I went after this product. For the past few years, I've been mostly a proponent of Shimano group sets because even though the SRAM Red group set has been improved quite a lot recently, I would say still not as good as the 12-speed Shimano offerings, and that one is not perfect either. So the biggest drawback probably is the crank system of the Shimano group set, and of course the lack of a proper power meter option. Yeah, I'm sure many will say that, yeah, but Shimano does offer a dual-sided power meter with their cranks. Unfortunately, they're very expensive, very outdated, and very crap at measuring your power. So it's not something I recommend using at all. So I was always looking at alternatives to supplement the Shimano group set with something else. And for a good while, I've been using this combination. So that's a SRAM or Quark dub crankset. I really like the dub standard because it's lighter and stiffer than a 24mm spindle that Shimano uses, and also does away with the drawbacks of the 30mm spindles, which we'll talk about later. And yeah, as you can see, SRAM or Quark also offers a power meter spider that is compatible with Shimano chainrings. I've used this in 2020, 2021, and I've put this on a lot of my clients' bikes. It works great. It's pretty lightweight as well. And of course, the Quark power meter is excellent. A few drawbacks here. So for some reason, Quark no longer offer the higher-end Dub SL crank, which is the red tier crank, as a standalone Quark version. In the past, they did do that. Now with the new E1, that is no longer possible. So you have to use a red branded crank on your Shimano group set, which some of the people will not be perfectly happy with. Also, you know, the crank itself is really fine. It's high quality, available in quite a big selection of sizes. One thing I don't like is the plastic preload adjuster. That's not very reliable, and yeah, it just doesn't look the part compared to the high quality elsewhere. And my main problem with this setup is that nowadays we always only do a bike build for a customer. We always start with a bike fit, and the unfortunate fact is that a lot of them need shorter than normal cranks, because a lot of people, particularly those with sedentary jobs, etc., have a very limited hip motion range. And with SRAM, the short variants, even though they do exist, the distributor here doesn't really carry them, and even if they're available for backorder, it usually takes months. So that's not a very convenient solution for me, apart also from the branding. Of course, we could send this out to the paint shop, remove it, and just put a Quark logo on there, or preferably maybe nothing, but that's time consuming and adds cost unnecessarily. So because of this, I was starting to look at different solutions. For another 2 years after this, I've been on the Rotor Power 2 Max system, so Rotor Althu 30mm crank, and the corresponding Power 2 Max NG power meter, which of course the Power 2 Max NG power meter is excellent, probably the best there is on the market, bar none. But again, I had a few drawbacks or issues with the Althu 30 system. So firstly, if you take a 30mm diameter spindle, the bottom brackets for it are designed in a way that, or well, maybe let's start from the other end. So the spindle is designed to fit directly in a 6806 bearing, and that means that the usually aluminum spindle sits directly on the steel inner race of the bearing, which over time causes problems. So firstly, the tolerances here are usually not very good. So it's either too tight or in most cases too loose, which causes a bit of play between the two interfaces. And as the aluminum spindle is a lot softer than a steel race of the bearing, it starts getting worn away ever so slightly, which leads to creaking, which leads to play and all kinds of issues. Obviously, this can be saved or even prevented by using bearing securing or retaining compounds, which do work, but they're unnecessary hassle to work around. So that was my major or main issue with this system, and it can be done or made to work very well, but it's something that's preventable by using a dub spindle, which usually sits on soft plastic sleeves that reduce the diameter, and these take away the tolerancing issues and also prevent the spindle from being worn. And they're easy to replace as well. So adding in that extra layer by reducing the diameter ever so slightly is, I think, a genius move from SRAM. And that's the preferred system. Another problem with the Al230 crank is the aluminum version is great fit-wise. It's offered in a wide selection of sizes that are also pretty well available. But it looks pretty industrial, so it doesn't really match the design of sleek aero bikes that we have nowadays. So that's a drawback for a lot of people if you're into the aesthetic part. Also, they're not super light by any means, and yeah, that's a turn-off. Of course, you will say that Rotor also offers the all-through carbon version, which is true. I've also tried to go down that way. Those are pretty light. However, I had some spotty reliability with those, so I had two cranks where the non-drive side kind of aluminum sleeve that's bonded into the crank arm, which holds it onto the spindle itself. This one got loose and it started moving radially as the bond failed. So that's the one thing. And the major drawback for me and for riders that need a narrow Q factor is that with those rotor altered cranks, the thread of the pedal is quite deeply recessed into the crank arm. So if I adjust my preferred cleat position and Q factor on them, then the shoe is actually getting extremely close to the crank arm and it's causing a lot of rub, and I just rubbed those cranks away, which was not a nice thing to do and also not very efficient. So yeah, that was another drawback. So I think around the summer of last year I saw an alternative. I think it was on Tadej Pogacar's Tour de France time trial bike, where they went to extreme lengths to reduce the weight for that one particular stage. And the crankset he had on there was the Cybre carbon crank. Then I looked into it, and I think SRM also uses these for their power meters. So even though it's a Chinese brand, which I'm not really familiar, to be honest, with these kind of products, I decided to give it a go, at least as a test unit, to see how it is, how it performs, and what the quality is like. But I imagined if they use them, SRM and Team UAE, then I figured it can't be bad at all. So I got the first unit on my bike. I started riding it for a few months. I paired it again with the Power2Max NG power meter, and it turned out to be a pretty formidable combination. So let's talk about what this brand and its crankset is about, and how it performs and what the features are. So handily, Cybre offers these cranksets with two different spindle types. So the first one of them is the aforementioned dub spindle, which I believe to be the best option out there on the market right now. So let's have a look at what it looks like. This is the packaging, by the way, fairly minimalist, so I like that. Don't use a ton of plastic unnecessarily. And here we have the crank arm itself. So the first thing you notice that this is an extremely light unit. In fact, when combined with my Red and Quark setup, or when compared to that, it saves around 60 grams, which this is already one of the lightest units available, apart from something silly like, you know, THM with their integrated cranks with the carbon spindle, but those don't have a proper power meter option, so I'm not really counting those. Anyway, here is the crankset. It comes as standard without the spider, so essentially this is what you get in the box: the two arms and a few spacers and pedal spacers as well. So let's talk about the drive side first. This is a hollow crank arm, of course. That's the reason for its lightweight. Also, it has been tested for stiffness. At least Cybre have their own data, which is public on their website. Obviously, I don't know all the details by heart, but it ranks up as some of the stiffest and the best in terms of stiffness to weight. So that's a good thing. So the drive side uses a raceway cinch interface, which is one that you can get power meters, Spider race power meters for fairly easily. There are quite a few options. So I think Sigay makes, or I don't know how you pronounce that, but yeah, you know what I mean. Then XKD offers that. From the more venerable options, it's the aforementioned Power 2 Max NG series. So I went for that, but I think in the future I'm also going to explore the performance of the more budget-oriented options. So this is the cinch interface. As you can see, we have a nice machined lock ring on there, which holds the spider in place. And actually the whole finish quality of all the products basically is extremely high. So I would say it's on par with SRAM or Shimano, or maybe even better. The machining is beautiful. Everything fits perfectly together. All the threads, all the details just fit and work. So unfortunately, it's not always the case with cycling components, even with high-end ones. So that's a sigh of relief for me. Also, all of the bolts have clearly marked torque specs on there, so you don't need to mess around with that. Neatly, also, the drive side also is mounted with a self-extracting bolt in there, like the rotor systems. Can be exchanged also, it's not permanently bonded on there, so another neat feature. So yeah, ticks all the boxes, I would say. Size-wise, these are available in, or ranging from 157.5 to 172.5 in 2.5 mm increments. We stock 160s and 165s mainly because this is what we use for our customer builds, and these are the sizes that aren't really that easily available from Shimano or SRAM. So that's the main reason. Obviously, if there is demand for it, then we'll stock more of these later on. For now, I just took a few units. I think we have 6 or 7 in here in stock in total, just to see how it goes. In the shop, I mainly try to focus on brands that aren't really easily available elsewhere or aren't available in Europe in general. So that makes it easier for the end customer accessing these parts. So yeah, this is the drive side crank arm. You also get a pretty basic manual in there which states how many spacers you need to use Obviously, it's best to measure out the crankset in the frame so it's perfectly centered. You can do that easily with calipers. So yeah, that's the process. If you don't want to use a power meter, they also offer two non-power meter spider options. So the basic one is the aluminum one. Again, extremely neatly machined, 4 times 110 BCD, so that's pretty much the standard these days. It's what Shimano uses, so that's why. And you get a huge amount of chain rings, single or double, in this configuration, so that's all very neat. This is how it looks like with the standard Cybre chainring. And as of very recently, they also started offering a carbon spider option for the weight weenies. This one saves around, I think, 10 to 15 grams relative to the aluminum one. It costs quite a bit more, as you would expect, but it's also the 4 times 110 BCD, and as a bonus, as you can see, it has a double configuration, so it can actually fit 5 times 110 BCD chainrings as well for some added compatibility. So yeah, that's how that looks. So if you want the lightest possible combination and you have power meter pedals, then it's something you can use. Then if you look at the non-drive side, crank arm, pretty much the same story here. The spindle is probably not designed to be user removable, but the nut here, or the lock ring, I would say, has a pronged tool interface. So possibly it could be removed or changed when needed. It uses a neat aluminum preload adjuster secured with hex bolts, so that's really nice. Actually, it resembles the Cane Creek EE crank design very, very closely, so I think that's a good thing. And of course, the interface at the end of the spindle is a taper, a splined taper, so yeah, that's how it fits. So nothing really revolutionary, it's just the basics done really well, I would say, with this crank, and it matches the needs of the current market. So yeah, I think it will definitely be a good option. So that's the dub spindle, and we can also have a quick look at the 24mm version, which I think is best suited to riders who either have a BB86 frame, BB90 frame, or maybe they already have a high-end bottom bracket of a different standard that they use for the Shimano cranks, because in this case you don't need to replace that bottom bracket, as it still uses a 24mm spindle. Or if you just bought a bike and it comes with the Shimano group set, this is a straight replacement for those cranks. So the design is essentially the same as with the dub version. The weight is slightly higher here, and unfortunately also the price, and that's because of the 24mm titanium spindle, which is again really nicely machined. It's pre-applied with anti-seize, so that's a good touch, because titanium and aluminum tend to mate really well together, unfortunately, if they're not treated that way. So yeah, similar preload adjuster here, similar spacers, so yeah, everything the same, just shrunk down, and using titanium for the spindle also cuts away most of the weight penalty for the 24mm spindle. So yeah, that's a pretty neat solution as well, if you're inclined that way. So this is a theory of the cranks and the spiders. So they look pretty neat. The branding is also quite subdued, and also the general shape of the cranks, I think, is a good match aesthetically for modern bikes. So that's another plus. Although it might not seem that way, actually, when you see it on the slender bike like on the SL8, actually the crank arms do appear quite massive. You can see a comparison with the red crankset here. But yeah, I think I'm pretty okay with the design. And now let's have a look at how it looks like installed on the bike. Okay, so this is the dub version of the Cyber crank in 165mm length installed on my bike. Now, mind you, the updates about this bike that we're going to post are not going to be probably in chronological order because of this video, but still I wanted to show the cranks, so that's why. So as I said, this is the dub version, 165. I have the Power2Max NG SL version, so the highest and lightest version of this power meter spider. It's been proven reliable over the years, and the main feature I like about it and the reason I went for it instead of the Quark and other combinations is that it's rechargeable, so I don't need to mess around with batteries. I really like that feature. And yeah, so the experiences with the crank, obviously it's as stiff as anything. There's no real noticeable difference there, so it's perfectly fine. The issue I had with the rotor cranks, not present here, happily. So as you can see, I didn't get basically any heel rub or any crank rub with my position, although I do have the standard Spindle Wahoo pedals on now for winter, because otherwise it's just not possible with the short ones to put overshoes on. So yeah, it's not ideal, but that's a compromise I need to make for winter. The cranks themselves, there has been no scoring on the spindle. There's no play, there's no seizing, no creaking, any quality issues or performance issues really that I can think of. So it all works perfectly fine, and that's also the reason why I decided to start importing them, because it's just a great option that you can get for your bike. And the chainrings, as you see here installed, are regular Dura-Ace chainrings. I've also tried Cyber's own carbon chainrings or carbon aluminum hybrid chainrings, and they work really well as well. But my issue with that is the combination they offer is a 54-38, and the reason I like these classic chain sets is exactly because of this small jump of just 14 teeth, and those have relatively big jump in between them, so that wasn't my favorite thing. Also, they're a bit louder than Shimano, and the shifting actually is extremely good. Obviously not as good as Shimano. I don't think any aftermarket chainring can really match that. Maybe the Carbon TI ones, but I haven't tried those yet. But yeah, unless you really just try to force it to fail, then the Cyber chainrings work just fine. So this is my combination. Sorry for the dirty bike, by the way. It's been sub-zero in terms of temperature, so I wasn't really able to wash it. Yeah, so as I said, this saved around 60 grams relative to the Quark and SRAM rat combination, so it's not huge, but it is something, and obviously the Power2Max power meter is great. So yeah, I think that's all. Another thing I wanted to mention, the reason I use the dub crank, of course, because it's cheaper and lighter and stiffer also. And since I was building this bike up from scratch, I just went straight away and put the dub bottom bracket in there. So that was the idea. Obviously it came with Shimano or something, then that 24mm is an easier swap. So yeah, that's pretty much it about this crankset. It's not really a well-known brand, I think, at this point, so that's also the reason why I decided to do this video, to show you my experiences and what it looks like in detail. So if you're interested, of course, you can get some in the web shop. We'll link the product links down below. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.